My father, mother, and I make frequent trips to the Smoky Mountains and stay in the cabins they have near Pigeon Forge. However, this particular trip still haunts me to this day. About 8 years ago, we stayed in a cabin that had an alarm system. It was already dark outside when we had reached the cabin and got settled in. We set the alarm and thought we should watch a movie together. While we were watching the movie, the alarm system went off. The alarm was only to go off if the door was open. We checked the cabin top to bottom and found absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning we had called the company that rented the cabin to us and asked if they could have somebody come out and check the alarm system. Someone came out and checked out the system, and he had said that he'd been called out to our cabin multiple times within the past month for the same exact problem. It was only the first day at the cabin, and I was already feeling a little creeped out. I noticed that there was a book on the table that the guests can sign and talk about how much they loved their trip. As I was reading more and more stories, I noticed that many of them mentioned feeling unsafe, and some even mentioned that they had found wet footprints on the deck next to the hot tub. I told my family about these stories, and they just told me that they were telling scary stories to get the other guests spooked. I agreed with them and went about my normal day. That same night, we all went to bed like normal. My father slept in the basement of the cabin. I slept on the main floor beside the kitchen, and my mother slept on the top floor. My dad snores really loud, so we all have to sleep far away from him, including my mother. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning when I was awoken by the fridge door closing. I looked up at the bright light from the fridge that was pouring into my room from the crack underneath my closed bedroom door. I noticed that the light would come and go as the fridge door seemed to continue to open and close. I assumed it was one of my parents leaning on the fridge door trying to decide what they wanted to eat for a late-night snack. However, I felt weird and didn't even consider to get out of bed to join in on the snack. The fridge light disappeared slowly, and I heard footsteps walk away from the bedroom and head in the direction of the steps to go upstairs to my mom's room. The footsteps seemed to stop for a second and then start to trip up the stairs. All of a sudden they stopped. I assumed that it was my mother and she had made it to her bedroom, so I fell back asleep. The next morning I woke up and went directly to my mother and asked her what she decided to eat last night. She looked at me and asked, "What?" I told her that I thought she was at the fridge last night opening and closing it because I heard her go back upstairs after a while around 2 a.m. She looked at me and said, "I thought that was you." At this time in my life, I was known to sleepwalk every now and then. "I saw you standing at the top of the stairs last night. Around that time, I assumed you were sleepwalking because you looked at me and then went back downstairs." At this point, I started to freak out and I became sick to my stomach. The rest of the trip, I slept with my mother on the very top floor. I didn't experience anything else that trip, and I never went anywhere alone. A couple months ago, after our trip, my father tells me that he was looking to rent another cabin for another trip. He went to go look at the cabin that we had rented last time and found out that that cabin had been closed and is no longer available to rent. Out of curiosity, he did some research to find out that many guests experienced something in that cabin. The complaints ranged from feeling unsafe, to people thinking someone was in the cabin that shouldn't have been there, to people leaving before their vacation was over. I am not sure what my mother and I had experienced that night at the cabin, but I know now that we weren't the only ones that went through something similar.
This has got to be one of the most weirdest, freakiest things that's ever happened to me. And I've had a lot of run-ins with paranormal stuff. I should start off by saying I live in an apartment at the time this story took place, on the 3rd floor. Late one night I heard a knock at the door. I thought it was our door, but it wasn't. It was the neighbor's. When I looked out the peephole, there were 2 kids standing outside his door. They looked to be around 13 and 6. I heard them ask to use the neighbor's phone, but I didn't see him open the door at all or even respond. At first it just seemed odd, but nothing too strange. Maybe they were lost, and the other neighbors didn't answer their door either. It wasn't until they both looked over at me. I made no sound to suggest I wasn't at the door. That's when I realized the situation was more than just odd. The way they looked at me made me think they could see right through the door. If that wasn't creepy enough, the more I focused on them, the more I realized they had black, dark eyes, as if their pupils were fully dilated or something. This extremely creepy feeling flooded over me. It felt like death. I immediately ran away from the door and sat on my couch, waiting for a knock at my door. After what seems like forever, I peeked through the peephole again, and they were gone. Why were these kids wandering around at night? Why did they climb up 3 flights of stairs to use a neighbor's phone? Why did I get such a bad feeling? The next morning I ran into our neighbors and asked them about the night before. He looked at me a little shaken and asked if they came to my door. I told him no. It looked like they were on drugs or something. He also told me that he called the police. Fast forward a few weeks later, I was telling my friends about these strange children, and she just kept staring at me in shock. She asked me if I've ever heard of black-eyed children. I laughed and told her no. She typed it into her phone and handed it to me. And holy shit, there's a lot of people who have the same experience. From what I read, it's a good thing my neighbor didn't answer the door. Apparently if they would have, he could have died. Or some people reported their family members caught an illness after letting them into the house, or dying a horrible slow death. It's been 1 year, and we moved into a townhouse. The first month we moved in, I felt like someone was watching me late at night. Then the knocking started. Someone would knock on our door almost every other night. Just 3 solid knocks. Every time I tried to look and see who it was, there was no one there. This continued for a whole month, and I know I wasn't just hearing things because it would wake our son up almost every night. I felt the dread feeling with every single knock. Then one night we just heard one kid banging on the door, and then nothing ever again. I'm not sure if it was the neighbor's kids playing pranks, or if the children followed us. But either way, I won't be opening the door to strange knocks at night. Thank you everyone who is listening to Cabin Nightmare Stories, and I want to give a big thank you to CreepyBlondeGirl for doing a collab with me. Please, everyone, go to her channel, YouTube, CreepyBlondeGirl, and check it out. And like always, thanks for listening.